Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into the mind of a psychological detective, a guy named Erich Fromm, and we're going to follow a trail that connects a tiny, remote Mexican farming village to, of all people, Adolf Hitler. So, what in the world is the link between a quiet little farming village and the man behind the Holocaust? I know, it sounds like a weird riddle, right? But the thread that connects them reveals something incredibly fundamental about who we all are. And the investigator pulling on that thread is Erich Fromm. See, he was completely convinced that to really get a handle on the human mind, you couldn't just study people in a lab. Nope, you had to go out into the real world and see how it all works in action. Fromm's whole approach was, honestly, pretty revolutionary. He was blending psychology with things like anthropology and history. So today, we're going to follow his investigative trail through two of his most powerful and wildly different case studies. All right, our first stop is the late 1950s in a small, pretty isolated village called Chiganquac. Now, Fromm wasn't there looking for one single patient. No, his goal was way bigger. He kind of wanted to put the entire community on the couch, to understand how their shared way of life created a collective personality, what he called a social character. And get this wasn't some casual survey. His team was meticulous. They went in and interviewed every single adult and half the kids in the village. I mean, we're talking a massive deep dive, using everything from questionnaires to dream analysis, all to build this complete psychological map of the whole community. So what did they find? Well, the portrait that emerged was of a community that was really shaped by generations of hardship. These were people who were deeply suspicious of each other, super pessimistic about what tomorrow would bring, and basically resigned to their fate. And Fromm was really clear. This wasn't him judging them. It was a psychological snapshot of what it takes to survive in a really tough world. Okay, this is where it gets super interesting. Fromm's team saw how this environment produced four very distinct personality types. You had the submissive workers who just kind of did what they were told, and you had the hardworking, independent farmers who saved everything. Both are pretty clear survival strategies, right? But then you also had this small, aggressive bunch who would exploit others with threats and force, and an even tinier, emerging group of capitalists who exploited people through business. You see, each one of these character types isn't just random. It's a direct answer to the question, how do I survive right here in this village? But you know what was maybe the most telling discovery of all? It was what they didn't find. Not one person fit the description of the modern marketing character, someone who sees themselves as a product to be packaged and sold. The fact that this type was totally absent was proof of Fromm's biggest idea. Our society, our economy, it literally builds who we are. Now that insight is the crucial thread. So let's follow it, as Fromm takes that exact same idea and shifts his focus from an entire village to the mind of one single infamous man. And that brings us to our second case study. And this is a huge leap, from a village of 800 people to the mind of one man. Fromm decided to conduct a kind of psychological autopsy on Adolf Hitler. To pull this off, he used a method called psychohistory. It's basically where you act like a detective, sifting through historical documents, letters, speeches, biographies, everything, to build a psychological profile of a person you can't actually talk to. And Fromm's conclusion was absolutely chilling. He didn't just write Hitler off as evil. No, he gave the pathology a specific name. He argued that Hitler was the world's clearest and most obvious example of something he called the syndrome of decay. So what in the world is this syndrome of decay? Well, Fromm broke it down into three distinct but connected pathological traits that, when they all come together in one person, create a personality that is just truly destructive. So first, there's necrophilia, and not in the literal sense, but a psychological attraction to everything dead, decaying, and destructive. Second is malignant narcissism, an extreme obsession with yourself, where other people only exist to serve your own interests. And third is incestuous symbiosis, which is this fanatical, almost obsessive devotion to your own group, in Hitler's case, the Germanic race, to the point where you want to destroy everyone who's not in it. So here is the most crucial point. Fromm did not believe Hitler was simply born a monster. His analysis suggests that this whole syndrome wasn't just inevitable. So how did it develop? How does a person get like that? Fromm basically traced this horrifying path. As a kid, he was spoiled, which planted the seeds of narcissism. Then, as a teenager, his dream of being a great artist was totally crushed, leading to this deep sense of humiliation and resentment. World War I actually gave him an outlet for that ambition, but then Germany's defeat was the final straw. Fromm believed this whole sequence of failures and humiliations is what locked in his destructive, necrophilic view of the world. And Fromm said the evidence was right there in his actions. His necrophilia? It was on full display in his obsession with destroying entire cities and his cold orders to murder millions. His malignant narcissism? Come on, it was clear in his belief that he, and he alone, could build a 1,000-year Reich. And that incestuous symbiosis? That was his fanatical, all-consuming obsession with the purity of the Germanic race.
So this all brings us to Fromm's final and maybe his most important point. It connects his study of this one man all the way back to the rest of humanity. And it serves as a really powerful warning for all of us.
Fromm insisted, and this is a really provocative idea, that we must not see Hitler as inhuman. He argued that stripping him of his humanity isn't just inaccurate, it's actually really dangerous. But why? Why would a psychologist studying one of history's absolute worst monsters insist that we see him as human? Well, the answer is the key to preventing something like this from ever happening again. And here it is, Fromm's profound reason, in his own words. What he's saying is, if we pretend that monsters are inhuman, that they're just some kind of demon that wears horns, we will completely fail to recognize the very human paths of narcissism and resentment and fanatical groupthink that can create them. By understanding the human potential for decay, we arm ourselves. We learn to recognize those warning signs, and we have a fighting chance to stop the next monster before they can ever rise.